I've been getting a version of this question a lot over the last couple of months. Why haven't I given up on Marvel? And I get it. I mean, look at the MCU. Look at what's happening right now. Oh my God. And frankly, I started to get asked the question so much that I started to think about the answer. And after months of self-reflection, after taking this very seriously, after losing sleep thinking about this exact question, I figured it out. I've got the real reason, the honest reason as to why I haven't given up on Marvel. And the tea, the spicy, juicy truth about why I haven't given up on Marvel. And I'd like to set the stage of this video by talking about Nick Cage. No, that might seem crazy, but I'm going somewhere with this. Just hang on. You know Nick Cage from movies. But maybe what you don't know about Nick Cage is that he's actually a giant comic book nerd. His real name is Nicholas Kim Coppola, but he changed his name to have sort of a stage name to prevent him from riding on the coattails of Francis Ford Coppola. Because yes, he is the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola. And he picked the name Nick Cage to honor the character of Luke Cage from Marvel Comics.
Sweet Christmas.
Nick Cage actually named his son Kal-El, the name of Superman. And at one time, Nick Cage was the proud owner of Action Comics #1, one of the most valuable comics on the planet, the first official appearance of Superman. And not only is that freaking cool, but it's also important because it's something that Nick Cage said that crystallized this whole question for me. Nick Cage helped me figure out the real honest reason why I haven't given up on Marvel yet. Hold that thought about Nick Cage. We're gonna come back to that because it's also important to talk about how I've been a Marvel fan. Like, I've been a fan of Marvel way before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was ever a thing. I mean, it's probably obvious that a guy who made YouTube channels called The Den of Nerds is a giant nerd, but it's also important to understand where this all started because it sets up why the MCU specifically was such a big part of my life. I first came across comic books on a spinner rack in a grocery store as a young boy. This was the mother 90s, and it was an incredible time to be a nerd. Comics were everywhere, partially because there was a speculative bubble that was about to burst and they were overprinting and overselling and eventually would go bankrupt. But regardless of all of that, comics were everywhere. They were on the rise and a big part of pop culture, and I remember seeing them on the spinner rack there while my mom's trying to buy groceries and asking if I could get one. She bought one for me. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. But the 90s were also a time of incredible animation for nerds. You had Dragon Ball popping off. At the end of the 90s, you have Pokemon start to pop off. And then in the middle of the 90s, you have the 90s Spider-Man show and the 90s X-Men show. And it was those two animated shows that really solidified my fandom of Marvel specifically. I frankly think a lot of nerds can relate to that. Those shows were fantastic and they were a perfect gateway drug for people my age at that time to get more into comics. Now, towards the end of the 90s, my love of Marvel had kind of cooled off, and there were various points in time in my life where I sort of drifted away from Marvel, stopped reading comics as much, but I always loved those characters and that universe, and so I'd always come back. And I came back to watch a lot of the movies that were made in the 90s and in the early 2000s when it came to comic book property. So because I had been hooked at a young age, I would come back to these movies whenever they released, and I enjoyed them. Like, I liked Blade, I liked the early X-Men movies, but it wasn't until 2008 and Iron Man that I not only came back to love the movies, but I had my fandom of Marvel reinvigorated and taken to an all-new height. Because you see, there was something unique in Iron Man, something that movie did that had never been done before in the comic book movie genre. And that would be the post-credit scene. But to be fair, there was actually a post-credit scene in a comic book movie before the first Iron Man. Do you remember the post-credit scene where Charles Xavier goes into the comatose body of his identical twin brother? Yeah, I tried to forget that shit too, but technically it was a post-credit scene that came out before Iron Man. However, the Iron Man one is totally different. It's not bringing back a character that was just killed in the movie to try to set up the fact that he'll be there in other films. No, the post-credit scene of the first Iron Man is the famous one with Nick Fury. Sam Jackson has Nick Fury coming in to recruit Iron Man into the Avengers and to explain to Tony Stark that he's now joined a larger world. But let's stop for a second because I can hear some of of you guys typing like, there's no way this dude's about to tell me that post-credit scenes are the reason he still loves Marvel. And no, that's not what I'm trying to say. And of course, Marvel needs to make better stuff. I mean, look at the Marvels. That movie actually has a really dope post-credit scene, and nobody really seemed to care. They did not go out for that movie. Like, I have been covering this stuff for 6+ years. I have watched in real time the decline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the way the discourse around Marvel has shifted. I mean, nowadays, there's actually people out there making money from crapping on Marvel. Like, that's the sort of new fashionable opinion to have, is to crap on Marvel. And like I said at the top of this video, I've been thinking about this. Like, why am I still riding with Marvel despite all the bad stuff that is happening? Like, I've literally lost sleep over this shit. I've thought about this extensively. It's taken me months to get to the point where I can honestly point to an exact reason as to why I'm still riding with them, and it has to do with the post-credit scene, it has to do with how I first fell in love with Marvel, and it has to do with Nick fucking Cage. So let me explain the Nick Cage connection. I recently watched a movie called Dream Scenario, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was an incredible movie, a lot of twists and turns, super bizarre. Nick Cage is phenomenal in it, but it's kind of a confusing movie. So I was looking on YouTube for videos to kind of explain certain aspects of the film, and I fell upon an interview with Steve Weintraub and Nick Cage himself over on the Collider Interviews channel. And the interview is great. Nick Cage talks a lot about the movie, the script, how he was able to put his own personal traumas and issues into the performance. But there was also something in that interview that I didn't expect to be there. And that's a part of this interview where Nick Cage talks about comic book movies.
Now look, the comic book movie, I will say one thing about it, all right? To be fair, comic books by nature are episodic. As a child reading it, I want to get to the next issue. So what they're doing is just having the comic book experience applied to the movie-going experience. Okay, I can't wait for this one or that one. I want to see the new issue. Instead of reading it, I want to look at it. So that's truthful to the comic book experience.
And when I heard Nick Cage say that, it all crystallized for me. It made it make sense. The thing that I truly loved about Marvel when I first got into it as a young person, the reason I kept coming back to it as they released other movies, and then the reason that the post-credit scene in Iron Man 1 just launched me into full-on Marvel fan mode, is because it's always been about anticipating the next thing. It's always been about what could be around the corner in the Marvel universe. And my enjoyment as a fan and also as a content creator has always been about that. I think the best way to explain this is to talk about the time in between Infinity War and Endgame. This was a fantastic time to be a Marvel fan. I'm sure you remember it if you're watching this video. And this was a time when my channel saw the most growth. The anticipation of Endgame coming out of Infinity War was insane. I had so many people coming to my channel, talking about it with me, joining my community, having all sorts of theories, trying to look for any rumor or leak or anything that was out there. That was the most fun I had as an MCU fan and as an MCU content creator. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wow, that's actually the most fun I've had recently, was like leading up to Spider-Man No Way Home. All the questions, rumors, Andrew Garfield interviews, trying to see what was really going to be in the movie. How crazy was it going to be? Even Multiverse of Madness with all the crazy multiversal leaks. That was the best time of that movie. That movie disappointed a lot of people. It didn't disappoint me, but it disappointed a lot of people. But the lead up to it was goated. That's when we had so much fun anticipating what's going to be announced at San Diego Comic-Con, what's going to be in the next movie, the next phase, how are they going to get to Secret Wars, thinking about the Red Hulk and Captain America 4, thinking about the Sentry in the Thunderbolts. What's that going to be like? What else could be in there? Now hold on just a minute and stop writing that comment that you're about to make about how this guy just likes being anticipated for the next thing and he doesn't actually care about the quality of the movie. Shut your mouth when you're talking to me. Of course, the quality of the movies are important, and I think, frankly, the first 3 phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe don't get enough credit for being pretty dang good. Like, a lot of those movies are better than they have any right to be. But the truth is, the formula of success that made Marvel what it is now did not depend on the actual quality of the movie. Let me give you an example of something that's really gonna drive this point home. Do you remember this quote from Martin Scorsese? I don't see them. I tried, you know, but that's not cinema. honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are, with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being. Do you remember that quote? Well, do you also remember that that quote was made in October of 2019? That was after Endgame and Spider-Man No Way Home had come out, arguably when the MCU was on its apex, totally and completely on top of the world. And if you've really been an MCU fan for years and years, you will remember various other quotes and comments like that from producers, directors, and critics. The truth is, as Marvel was burning up the charts, crushing it in pop culture, and becoming the next big thing, there were a ton of people deriding it for not being cinema. And so all I'm trying to say is that this idea that Marvel just had all these incredible movies that blew critics and fans away, and that was what led them to be as successful as they were, is revisionist history. That's not true. That's not what happened. I mean, think about the Captain Marvel movie making $1 billion. That movie is not $1 billion movie. Like, I don't hate that movie, but there's no universe in which that particular film should have made that amount of money. But because it was between Infinity War and Endgame, because there was so much anticipation of Endgame, it drove people to go see Captain Marvel thinking there would be some kind of a connection, some kind of information, some kind of a payoff that would help to explain Endgame. It's obvious. It's like Nick Cage said, the anticipation of the next thing, that experience that we had as young comic book fans, as fans of these animated shows. That experience is wrapped up in anticipating the next thing, getting excited about the future possibilities, and then, yes, enjoying the actual film stories and experiences with other fans. So like I said, this is kind of an embarrassing thing to admit. It took me a long time to sort out my feelings, to really decide why this is happening. And the truth is, like, I came to this conclusion. I'm still having fun covering Marvel. And yes, I realize how bad it is. And the real danger here is that things become so bad that we can't actually anticipate things in a positive light. Like, we can no longer get excited about the next thing. We can no longer get excited about Secret Wars or the X-Men or the Fantastic Four because we're so focused on how bad things have been recently. That's the real danger. That's really what's killing Marvel. But me, myself, I still have fun anticipating the next thing. I still have fun trying to figure out how it'll fit together, what aspects of these different characters or stories from Marvel Comics will be adapted into the MCU version. I genuinely and passionately love that aspect of the fandom, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe created that on a large scale for a lot of normies and more casual nerds. And it's like why they were successful. They took that thing that made comics what they were, and they blew it up to the big screen. They blew it up as the pop culture zeitgeist. And I genuinely still have fun anticipating the next thing, thinking about how dope it could be. I thought a lot about this. I've considered other channels, making other channels, pivoting into anime, and I am making my own comics. I've been doing a lot of comic book work recently, but when I dove deeply and I got really honest with myself, I realized I'm still having fun. And it's that same aspect of Marvel that I've always had fun with. And so far, even despite the MCU going on a super big decline, I'm still having fun with that aspect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'd love to know what you think about this video and my sort of confession and the way that I got there. So let me know in the comment section below. And as I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.